I want to go over some of the funny things you've seen in racing. I know you've seen a lot during your racing career.
I have seen a lot. I've seen a lot going back to my daddy's career back in the early 50s. I remember, you know, as everybody knows, they claim that racing started from the moonshiners getting together with their cars and racing them out of the field, and then it developed into more and more and more and got where it is today. And there's some merit to that. But I will tell you that I've seen a lot of moonshine and a lot of fighting going on with the racers back in the old days. I remember down at Lake Blackshear, at the racetrack at Lake Blackshear, back in the, I was a young guy in the middle 50s, I guess. Daddy had a, I don't know if we want to put this in there now, but Daddy had a black man that went with him everywhere he went to the racetrack. He had two different ones during the time, and one of them named Ram and one of them named Bob. But they went to the track with Daddy and they changed tires and they did this kind of stuff, and they worked with Daddy. Daddy had a little garage up in Henderson right above Venezuela where we were born and raised. And but they worked in the shop with Daddy and went to the races. They were with him. And I remember down in Lake Blackshear, Cordell, one Sunday afternoon, my brother and I was there with him, and Daddy's car was down there, but he was having somehow or another water had gotten in the fuel, and they couldn't get it cleaned out. And they'd go out there at the track, and that thing would pop and sputter. So finally, Daddy withdrew the car. Well, the tech man didn't show up that weekend, so they had Daddy if he'd be the tech man, and he told me he would since the car wasn't running. I cannot remember who it was that won that race. I believe it was a McDonald. They had two McDonald's, Mr. Eddie McDonald and Mr. Willie McDonald. They wasn't even kin to one another. But anyway, whoever won the race that Sunday, Daddy was taking his car, and he found an electric fuel pump, which was illegal at that time, an electric fuel pump up under the driver's seat. And somehow or another, they got to argue. And when they start fighting back in those days, the black guy that looked at Daddy, he'd have to get in the car because, you know, back in those days, a black guy couldn't go out there trying to fight anybody. And if he'd even been around out there, he'd probably got whipped or worse. But I remember Daddy came over and told Bob at the time, he said, Bob, this thing couldn't get bad. Everybody was coming toward the car. He said, this thing couldn't get bad. He said, get those boys and get in the car. So Bob and me and my brother Hugh, we got in the car and looking out the window, and they had the darndest fight out there you ever seen in your life. And one reason they were doing all that fighting is because back in those days, you know, sort of anything goes. There's a lot of drinking at the races going on, and you know, they'd be drinking that moonshine, they'd get high a little bit, and they'd go to fussing and fighting. But I distinctly remember that as being a big brawl down there at the Lake Blackshear racetrack because one of the drivers had an electric fuel pump in his car. But another thing that I remember, that I barely remember, I don't know the details, but I do remember this. This was also down in Cordell. Daddy's car won the race down there one night, and it was supposed to have been a stock. The engine back in those days was supposed to be stock, and I think the rules said, anyway, this particular race, the rules said must use all stock parts. Well, Daddy's car won the race. They protested the car. They wanted to pull the motor completely down. So they loaded up the car and they took it to downtown Cordell, and there was an old Buick dealership on the main drag in Cordell on 7th Street, and they put it in that dealership, and they pulled the car apart. They pulled the motor apart, and what they found was the old flathead motor. If anybody knows anything about them, one of the cylinder heads was real easy to get off. The other cylinder head, you just about had to take it out of the car to get it off. So they pulled the right side of Daddy's motor, and they looked, and everything was up to specs and all. Well, one of the guys that protested, he put in fussing about pulling the left side. Well, of course, Daddy never shoot. Well, you know, that left side is so hard to get off. You see that side over there, I'm legal, you know, why you want to pull the left side? Well, they ended up, they pulled the left side off. And come to find out, there was great big old pistons on the left side of that motor. Daddy took the position that they were stock pistons, and they were. The right side had regular flathead V8 pistons in it. Daddy had bored out the left side of that motor, and he had put stock pistons back in it, but the only problem was, and the arguing point was, those pistons had come out of a 6-cylinder forward engine, which had a lot bigger pistons than a V8 forward engine. And they went to arguing and pushing and carrying on, and never did break out into a real fight, but they had to call the police down there. And we loaded the car up. Again, I was a young boy then, and police escorted us out of town to keep a fight from going on to the city limits. And once we got to city limits, they turned and went back and we came on the road. So there was a lot of fighting and fussing going on. They was also fighting going on back when I was racing in the 80s. I used to get in it all the time, and me being real small, you know, it was easy to try to pick on me, but I was always the kind that I didn't let anybody pick on me, and I was sort of mild back in those days, and so we used to get in it quite a bit. I remember the first race I ran down at Fort Eagle. It was on a Sunday afternoon, and I led the race until the last lap, and I think it was Lavon Sloan, it might have been Jimmy Sloan. They spun me out. They didn't spin me all the way out. They run me out. They got in the back of me, and I run off up the bank, and like they lost the car, and they ended up winning the race, and I finished third. So I went over a local guy in Cordell named Raven Backwell. He used to run a yellow number 35 every week. I went over the car and I said, look here. I said, you know, we're not going to play. That was my first time down there. I said, we're not going to play that way. I said, you know, you did that on purpose. And I said, if you want to play that way, you know, we'll play, and, you know, I'll give it back to you a whole lot harder than you get it. And I won't never forget, Raymond spoke up and he said, yeah. He said, I know you. He said, they tell me that you got a lot of money. He said, your money don't mean a damn to me. He said, we'll race you, and we'll wreck you, and we'll protest you every week. I said, well, you know, have it your way. Don't matter to me. We'll do it whichever way you want to. We'll just both fix our cars every week. Well, it wasn't too long after that, we won a race down there in Cordell, and Raven protested my car. And I remember, I think it was 28 things that he had on the list that he wanted to look at on my car. So, of course, you know, we used to race at 12, 1 o'clock in the morning down there, you know, sometimes later than that. And it looked like it was going to rain. The race had gotten over with, and they had a big, long list of little protests. So we loaded my car, and we took it to the farmer market down in Fort Eagle, one of the sheds down there. And they started tearing my car apart. I won't never forget, I had finagled around. I had a stock oil pan on my car. But what nobody knew is that I had a dry sump system. And the rules said no dry sump oil pan. I didn't have a dry sump oil pan, but I had a dry sump system built inside the stock oil pan on my car. And I won't never forget, a boy, of course, the car was jacked all up in there, and he rolled up under that car. And I was standing there, and he come out, and he told Raven, he said, you know, you got a stock oil pan on that car? Which you couldn't run a stock oil pan back in the days without you know, it didn't hold enough oil, and it didn't have the baffles in it and all. But I had to stop all of it. But they never caught that I had a barn pump in there. Well, after probably 3 or 4 hours, they checked everything they could check on the car, and I passed the protest. And I took the money home that night. So, but since that time, Raven and I, we've become the best of friends. I talk to him quite a bit.
Isn't that funny how that happens though? You see that a lot in racing, don't you?
It is. But he didn't like me at all to start with because, you know, I didn't have a lot of money. I guess somebody told him I was a banker, and a lot of people associate bankers with having a lot of money. And but it bothered him a little bit, I think, because I had a real good car, and he apparently thought that I had a bunch of money and was going to be some competition with him, and we were competition for him. But like I say, we're the best of friends right now. And I also had a problem with the Sloan boys. They called me one night, it was probably 1 o'clock in the morning, we had out down at the racetrack. I don't know if I was before or after they drove my car through. They called me at home, and I think after the race they'd gone out to a bar or something, was feeling good. I answered the phone about 1 o'clock that morning, and they said, told me who they were, and that I didn't do them right that night, and they was coming up here, and they were going to whip me. Get ready for it, and they was on the way up there. And I told them, I remember telling them, I said, look guys, I don't want to impose you boys, but you know, y'all use your best judgment. If you come to my house, you know, we're not going to be fighting. I'm going to be shooting at this time of the morning. And of course, it never came up there, and a few weeks later, they told me, they said, oh, we were just picking at you that night. We wasn't going to come over there. We just told you we would come over there. But they too are good friends of mine, and I think both of them, from what I understand, they're racing a little bit down in Needmore right now. We've had a lot of experience in racing.
Who's some of the biggest rivalries you've seen over the years that you've been in racing in this area?
Well, going back to my daddy's days, I still remember a lot of those guys. There was a guy named Barney Smith. He owned, now I'm going back before he owned dealerships and this kind of stuff. I'm going back to the 50s, the early 50s. A guy named Barney Smith, who later owned Barney Smith, Lincoln Mercury up in Macon, and dealerships in Perry and all over. He was a good racer back in those days. And a guy named Charles Tidwell, who was a great racer. There were two brothers named James Bennett and Bill Bennett. I don't know if this is true or not, but they used to say that they would go get James out of the middle home on Saturday afternoon to take him to the racetrack to drive. Now, he did drive like that, but they always said he was a middle person. I don't know if he was or not, but both James Bennett and Bill Bennett, they were great race car drivers. One local guy here from Cordell named Stan Parnell, he drove my daddy's car. Not Stan Parnell.
Talking about Skip?
No, I'm going back to the 50s. Leland Fowler.
Okay.
Leland Fowler back in those days was a good racer. He lived in Cordell, and David Chetsey in Unadilla was a great racer back in later days, 70s and 80s, won a lot of races. And David married Leland's daughter. But Leland died about 2 years ago, but he won a lot of races from his dad back in the 50s. And there's a guy, I think he was an Indian, his name was Nero Steptoe. He was a big racer back in those days, and Eddie McDonald. I remember Eddie McDonald, in fact, at the awards banquet down in Daytona this past February, I presented Eddie with the Saturday Night Hero Award. And I started out by telling him how long I had been knowing Eddie McDonald. And it's a true story. I remember been over the old horse racetrack in the 50s, probably the early 50s, as just a very young boy, that you hear the announcer say, Eddie McDonald from Bangor, Maine. And I didn't know where Maine was, but I knew it was a long way from home. And I wondered, I said, what in the world is he doing all the way down into Maine, racing this little track, dirt track on Saturday night? But he won a lot of races back in those days. And but they used to always say Eddie McDonald from Bangor, Maine. I found out later that he was from Maine, from Bangor, Maine, but that he was in the military and he was stationed over in Columbus at Fort Benning, and that's the way he ended up here in Georgia. And of course, he met a woman down here, and he married her, and he liked the South, so he just stayed here. But I remember Eddie McDonald from back in the early 50s, and there's another McDonald named Willie McDonald from Albany. That was a good racer. Now he came along a little bit past Daddy. I tell you this story, there's a guy named Billy Sawyer from Hawkinsville, Georgia. Billy Sawyer, and I know his name, and Paul McDuffie. Anybody that knows anything about the early days of NASCAR racing knows the name Paul McDuffie. Paul McDuffie was known back in the 50s and 60s as the top crew chief in NASCAR. He crew chief for a guy like Fireball Robertson, Curtis Turner. He was a Chevrolet guy for General Motors back in those days, building Chevrolet. And he was a great one. But in the 1960s, they had a bad wreck up in Charlotte. I think it was Charlotte, could have been Dolly. A car skid sideways, skid off the track, skidded into the pit wall, and killed Paul McDuffie. Paul McDuffie and Billy Sawyer was from Hawkinsville, and they were always a team. Billy Sawyer also drove my daddy's car, and Paul McDuffie, they used to come up at Henderson, and they would work, and I remember them back in those days. And then, like I say, Paul left and went on to do good and better things as one of the top car crew chiefs in the sports ever known. He will probably be in the Hall of Fame one day. But Billy Sawyer was a good racer, and he had his own car. A guy named Stan Parnell from Atlanta, a guy named Doug Wells from Atlanta. They was a good racer. There's just so many of them that I still remember from back in the 50s.
Did you ever have any dealings with Sam McQuagg? And I know you did with Harvey Jones.
They do,
Harvey Jones.
Sam, of course, you know, he was a NASCAR driver. He won the Firecracker 400 down there in Daytona, and it was in the 60s, I think. Actually driving, I think it was a Georgia car from a lady down in Valdosta named Betty Lilly. Betty Lilly was her name, and I think that was the car he was driving. It might not be, but when he won Firecracker, I did know Sam McQuagg, and prior to going to making it big time in the NASCAR and all, Sam also used to run a lot of races with me. He was from over in Columbus, Georgia, and he used to come over quite a bit, and he was one of the most feared names that, you know, when he would come into a track that everybody knew he was there to win. There's some other names that most people don't know. One of them named Curly Allison. When he came to a track, everybody, oh, here's Curly Allison, you know, we better be on our best game tonight. This too is going back in the 50s and 60s. Curly was a good racer. Another guy from Atlanta named T.C. Hunt. T.C. was a great racer. And he'd bench off, they used to run the old Peach Bowl up there a lot in Atlanta. But they'd bench off down this way, and they were always a threat to win races. There was a lot of good racers along in those days, and people just can't imagine the kind of cars that they had to drive and how they had to manhandle those cars versus the cars they're driving today with power steering and big wide tires and that kind of stuff.
Well, you mentioned Red Farmer earlier. Now, he's still driving some, isn't he?
Red is still driving. I hadn't talked to Red. It's been, well, back early in the year, I guess, since I talked to Red. He was having a shoulder problem. But he is still driving. I tell you a story about Red. I had built a brand new late model car, and this is probably in the early 90s. I also, before that, Robert Yates had a Havoline car, a brand new car. They run in Daytona, and I believe this was 1989 or 90. That Davey got bumped going on down the back straightaway at Daytona, run off the car and flipped the car, and Robert chose not to fix that car. And he gave me that car. Well, the next year, I got the car ready, and we went to Daytona to run an ARCA race with Red, and Red drove in the ARCA race down there. And he sat back there and run second for most of the race. And he'd come on the radio and he said, "Marvin, we're going to win this race, we're going to win this race." But he couldn't pull out and pass the guy because every time he'd pull out, one of the hood pins was missing on the car, and it would raise up. And he was afraid if he pulled out behind, he was afraid it would rip the hood off the car. He was just having a big time driving that car. He said, "We're going to win it, Marvin, we're going to win this race." He said, "I can go around anytime I want to." Charlie Glotzblack was the one leading that race. And, but on the next to the last lap, somebody got bumped back down the back straightaway, and some lap cars up in front of the leaders, and they went to slide that which way, and Red had to take to the dirt and run all down through the dirt. He didn't wreck the car, but he cut a tire down during that time and had to come in the pits. Ken was running that ARCA race too, and I think they ended up, and Ken finished fourth in that race, and Red in my car finished fifth. I don't know if Charlie Glotzblack won that race that time or not, but that is the same race that everybody knows. Keselowski in Winston Cup this year that won the championship. It was his daddy, or either his daddy's brother, was running that ARCA race this was 1990, I think it was. And a car got hit and ran off the track, and all the EMT personnel came out to the car and close to the track, and they were trying to give him attention to get him out of the car, and another car got hit and spun off and went out and hit that car and like to kill that EMT guy. It took him several years to ever recover. He never recovered.
I remember seeing it. Was that the one where he was flipping? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do recall seeing that.
That was the same race. But another story I was going to tell you about Red, I had built a brand new late model car. Never had run before. And Red was having shoulder problems. This was back in the late 80s, 88, 89. And it never been run before. We hurried up and tried to get it ready. And we went to Red and Dale Earnhardt was having a grudge race. They always race at the Talladega short track across the road from the big track on Saturday night before the Talladega race on Sunday. And they still do. They still have it. But Red and Dale Earnhardt were having a grudge race, and they had played it up real big over there that night. So Red was going to drive my brand new car. And we went to Talladega and got the car out, and I remember Earnhardt telling me, he said, man, he was going to drive a black car. I forget the guy from over there in Eastern Boulder, Alabama, and always had a real fast race car. He was going to drive that. But he'd come over at the car, and he'd look at that car, and it was a real pretty car, very pretty, like I said, never been on the racetrack. And we had really dressed it up for Red to make the first race run against Earnhardt. come around and tell me, he said, man, I'm gonna put your car through that, off of that track, and it ain't gonna look that pretty when this race over with. I'm gonna tear it up. And Red would joke with him. He said, man, you ain't gonna be able to catch this car. Ended up, Red went out and driving the car. We had trouble with the power steering, and he couldn't turn the car. So he and Earnhardt swapped cars. So my claim to fame, I guess, is Dale Earnhardt drove one of my cars one time. And this was about in 1989, I think, on the Talladega short track. And, but we didn't get the car towed up. We came back and drove that car and run it. We beat a guy named Larry Bullock from Fort Hill drove my car for a while. Larry used to win a bunch of races down there at Fort Hill. And I can't remember what happened to that car. But in later years, I was talking about all the drivers that everybody feared and always had a chance of winning that race. On back into my racing day, even in the 60s, in my racing days, after Dad and them bunch, and some of the old timers were still around, but a new group came through. One name comes to mind was Bob Moore, won a lot of races around the Middle Georgia area. He ended up going and run the Daytona 500, I know one time, maybe 2 or 3 times. And I think he run Atlanta a few times. And he was a real good racer. I just got an email from one of them, a guy a couple of days ago named Don Tomlin from Warner Robins. He won a million race up in Middle Georgia. There's a guy named Friday Hassler that won a bunch of races up in Middle Georgia and all over the country, really. He was one of the best short track racers ever. He got killed in a car down in Daytona, I think it was. But Friday, he was a real big racer back in those days. Another guy named Burnett, Charlie Burnett was his name. He was a real racer, and he had a little old, back in the 60s, he had a little old 37 Chevrolet coupe, I think it was, with a Chevrolet motor on it. And I mean, he could really drive that car. He was mine an idol back then, because I was just starting and he'd been around a while. But he won a lot of races back in the 60s and on up into the 70s. And he too ended up and ran the Daytona 500. He never ran over 2 or 3 big track races. I know he did run Daytona at least 1 year. I think he ran Atlanta and maybe Darlington. A lot of people don't know it, but Eddie McDonald, and of course, Eddie had pretty much gone. Me and Eddie did, I remember we did race once or twice together back in the 60s, but Eddie McDonald, a lot of people don't know it, ran NASCAR. He ran Daytona, he ran Darlington, he ran Atlanta. He ran 3 or 4 races. Down at Cordell, I'm trying to think of the guy that dominated down there, David Chetson. Used to win a bunch of races at Cordell. Skip Panell, he was a real good racer down there. Devon Sloan, Jimmy Sloan, they all won races. And Mr. Willie McDonald from Albany, his son Bubba McDonald was a good racer. He owned bug killing company down there. I guess it's still around, I don't know. But Bubba was a good racer. And then there's a lot of guys that in the lower classes that I can't remember the names right now, used to win week after week after week.
How about car builders and all, mechanics and that type? Who are some of the names in this area that's really stood out to you?
Well, you know, in the late model cars, most of the guys would send their cars off somewhere. I used to get my motors, some of them from when I was racing around Cordell and stuff. Robert Yates would do me up some motors from time to time. And but around here, there were some guys that built motors. In fact, the business I built, after I quit racing, I built a bunch of racing motors. I've always enjoyed mechanics, and we owned Mid-State Auto Parts and Machine Shop down in Cornell. We had an engine machine shop building themselves. Well, we built engines and sold them to car dealerships and garages and that kind of stuff. And I got back down there and I learned a lot about milling heads and angle cutting them and this kind of stuff. And I built a good many motors that won races down there in Cornell. There's some other local guys, and I have to stop and think, since I've been sick, I can't remember like I used to. If I stop and think about it, it'll come to me, but there's a lot of local guys that also, I know a guy over in Cochran was a really good engine builder. One of them Americans was a really good engine builder. Western Burke down in Cornell has built a lot of motors, and he still races down there in Cornell. I just can't remember their names, all of their names right there. Of course, I've met so many people in racing that, it's just hard to keep them all apart. My racing runs, like I say, from my daddy's time in racing to my time in racing to Ken's time in racing to David's time in racing, and I get them jumbled up sometimes.
Now, your time as owner of the track in Cordele, you've had a lot of young drivers come through that went on and made it pretty big, hadn't you?
We have had a lot of young drivers. They used to have some heck of a legend races down at Cordele when Mr. Marsh, of course, got through renovating that track. Reed Sorensen, he run Cup for a while and still does some Cup races. And he was one of the best races going back, 10 years ago. And, of course, David run at Cordele a lot. My son run down there at Cordele. Joey Logano, who's probably got as good a future in racing as anybody I know of. He ran down that Cordele some from Bandler Road to Legends cars all the way up to Lake Mall cars. And there's several others. There's a lot of them that most people never heard of that came up in the Bandler Roads and Legends, is now racing late models and even the trucks and Nationwide. There's some others doing that.
I know you've had Chase Elliott down here quite a few times running Legends, and now he's running these late models, isn't he?
I remember Chase when he ran his first Bandler Road car.
Really?
Chase is a very good racer. He's got a heck of a future. The first time he run a big car down at Cordele, I went down there and talked to him. I know Bill. I've been knowing Bill since back in the 80s when we was racing against him. And I told Chase, I said, Chase, this is a very forgiving track down here, but I see a lot of young guys come down here. And because there's not a wall and all, they try to push them cars too hard. I said, I know this is your first late model race, but I said, what I always recommend these young guys do is just get in seat time. Just get back there. Don't try to see how fast you can go. Just finish this race. It's important that you finish this race. And of course, Chase has always been real quiet and all. He said, yes, sir. I said, don't get out there and see how fast you go. Just stay out of trouble and finish the race. And that's what you need to do. He said, yes, sir. Well, I felt like an idiot after the race was over with. So Chase ended up finished fifth in that race. And I've been watching him back when he was in Legend cars. He got a water talent. Bill told me one day, Chase was probably 13, 14 years old. Bill told me, he said, I rented a truck, like a craftsman truck, but it wasn't a craftsman truck, like a low-class craftsman truck like they run in Atlanta and all. And he said, I rented a truck, and we went up with a meal. And he said, I'd go out there and run some laps and try to set it up. Then I'd put Chase in that truck, and he'd go out there and run some laps. And he said, I run that truck just as hard as I could run it. And then he'd get in there, and he would beat me by 2/10 of a second. He said, I don't know where he gets that from. And I laughed, and I said, Bill, you know he gets it from you. That's where he gets it from. Bill just couldn't get over it how he'd go out there and run that thing just as hard as he could run it. And Chase would go out there behind him and run almost 2/10 quicker than what Bill was running. So Chasey's got a world of talent, and of course Rick Henry has recognized that talent, and he got Chase on the contract.
I think he'll be running some truck races this year, from what I'm hearing.
Well, no, he won't be running into this year because he's not old enough. You say Cup?
No, the truck.
Truck. Oh yeah, they changed the truck. Chase just turned 17 years old, and they changed the trucks where you can run a truck at age 17 now, not at Daytona and stuff, but on the smaller track.
Mile or less.
That's right. And so, while Henry Motorsports does not have any trucks, with the operation they've got, they can get one quick, and I fully expect to see Chase him one before the year's over. I hadn't talked to him lately, or asked Bill or anything since they came out of that room, but I fully expect him to be in the truck before the year's over.
Looking at some of those guys that's traveled through here over the last few years, I've seen guys like the Hemrick kid, the Kyle Benjamin. He's pretty strong too. But there's a lot of these young kids that have been coming through here at Speedfest last year that are going to be here again this year. They got a bright future, don't you think?
There's no question about it. Couple things with those guys. Most of those young guys are starting out. They couldn't get in it if they didn't have access to a little money. So when you got money, you can get the best stuff available. You can go test. You can keep new tires on the car, which is a real big thing, you know. So naturally, they gonna do better than just the average guy that's just starting out that, you know, goes and buys them old used car and don't have a lot of money and wants to race. So they gonna do better. But the Cup guys, Joe Nemechek, you know, he's got a boy that's 15 years old, named John Hunter. He led the Speedfest that we had back in January last year, so, and he led the snowball derby last week down there in Florida. In fact, David stood on the pole down there for the snowball, and Nemechek finished outside pole. Started on the outside pole. Kyle Busch was 6th, I think. No, Kyle was 5th, and Chase Elliott was 6th. The kid that won the snowball derby was 16 years old. And, but there's a lot of talent out there coming along. And I credit a lot of that with 600 Racing, who built the Battle Rose and Legends car. Prior to 600 Racing coming in, it wasn't really anywhere where a young guy, an 8-year-old kid, or a 9 or 10 or 11 or 12-year-old kid could race unless it was in go-kart. Well, 600 Racing started Battle Rose and then moved up to the Legends cars. The Legends car is a full-blown race car with coil shocks and suspension on it and this kind of stuff. The go-kart doesn't have any suspension. So, and those Legends cars are powerful enough and no more than what they weigh that they got just about more power than you can use on a racetrack, so you have to learn how to handle that power. So those kids start out racing Battle Rose at 8 or 9 or 10 years old. So you take 14-year-old kids now, it's been racing 5 or 6 years. Well, used to, you take a guy couldn't start racing till he got 20 or 21 years old. A 21-year-old kid now might have 10, 15 years experience racing. So it makes a lot of difference. But that little Nemechek kid, he's going to be a good racer.
Matt Kendall's son was one.
Kendall's boy, Ross, he's going to be real, real good. And I read what Kyle said he sure would love to put him in his truck, and he thought he had the talent and all that, and he didn't get it worked out. Somebody else going to be in it. And of course, everybody remembers Ernie Irvin that ended up driving Robbie Yates and got hurt and had to retire. he's got a kid that's racing, and he'll be down here in January, next January to race. And that kid's only, he might be 14 years old. I know he's not over 14 years old. He's a little small boy, but I think he's got a lot of talent too. But there's a lot of these boys that's got a lot of talent you will hear from. You know, I don't know, but I do know this. We had a lot of cars down there last year, and you couldn't ask anymore for any better racing. I think if people will come down there, there's no question they're going to see as good a short track racing they see anywhere in the world. And I put all this briefly. We're going to move the haulers out of the pits this year, so everybody can see real good. And that's going to be a real big plus, because those big haulers there, you know, it's hard to see what's happening back there on the back straightaway. We're going to get them out there this year. We're going to have a lot of named drivers down there. Right now, I haven't got it situated yet, but I do plan to have an autograph session for past, present, and future NASCAR stars. When I say past and present, one, we're talking to Rusty Wallace. I didn't make it to Snowball, but Ken did talk to him. Rusty's son is talking about coming down and racing with us. Rusty said if he could work it out, he would come and he could do an autograph session for us. Of course, I can get Bill to do an autograph. I'm going to try to get Nemechek. I'm going to try to get Earnhardt. Hopefully Matt will be down watching Ross race, and I'm going to try to get Matt in that autograph session. And of course, Joe Nemechek, he's already committed to me that he would do it. So that's some of the past and present. And of course, the future guys, which we talked about, is Chase and John Hunter Nemechek, Irwin and Ross Kendrick and that bunch. So I think we're going to have some superstars on there. There ain't no question in my mind we're going to have some super racing.
So if people wants to see a good race, they need to come to Speed Fest this year. Looking back on your history in racing now, what do you want to be most remembered for?
Well, you know, I don't know. Certainly, I would like to be remembered as a real good race car driver, but I don't know if that can be justified. I like to be remembered as a NASCAR owner, and that can be justified. But certainly there's nothing we didn't do anything to brag about. And I like to be remembered as a good track promoter, which remains to be seen. I think we've done a decent job in Fort Hill. We haven't promoted the track like we needed to, but we tried to provide a good, safe place to race. We tried to provide facilities that, you know, is always clean. We tried to provide a variety of racing by coming up with different classes that people could fit into, and then we tried to provide some big racing for people that like to see the out of towners come in from time to time. So I guess in just short, I just like to be remembered as a racer. I spent a lot of time in it and enjoyed every minute of it, and didn't take nothing for what the heartaches and all that went along with it, because it was a lot of joy. I tell my kids, and I tell David, I said, look, when you win a race, you better really, really enjoy it, because there's a lot of heartache in between. It's not easy. You're going to lose a whole lot more than you can win, so you win when you better enjoy it, because it's not going to always be that way. And I think they look at it that way. My son's talking about coming back home because of my sickness, and he told me Thanksgiving when he's home, I said, Brett, I'd like for you to come back home, but only if you want to come back home. And he said, well, you know, I think I'd like to come back home, but he said, you know, I like it up there. He said, I like going to the races. He traveled every race. Of course, they fly. It's a lot different from us. He said, I enjoy going to racing. I enjoy all the guys and all of that, but he said, I know I don't want to do it forever, but he said, I can, he said, I can come home and look back and feel comfortable. He said, I won 28 races, NASCAR races. He said, I won 2 championships, which they won the national championship, nationwide championship this year, which still have. And he said, I've accomplished, you know, I think quite a bit. And he said, I can come back home and just remember, you know, what I've done and feel good about what I've done. And that sort of goes back to me from my time of trying to race in the 60s when I didn't have any money. Struggling, you know, trying to get up enough money, trying to get a car ready, and trying to get something to haul up and down the road on, and then going on to the 80s when I worked hard and get somewhat of a success. I get my feet in cup racing, knowing I didn't have no about the financing that the other people we was competing against had, and then getting into the racetrack down there and knowing, wanting to do so much more for the racers and for the track and all, but knowing I couldn't justify it from a financial standpoint. So while I'm pretty much content with what I've done in racing, you know, I just wish I could have done a whole lot more. Racing's been a big part of my life. It's been a big part of my family's life, and I plan to stay involved with it as long as I'm here.
Let me ask you this. How's your wife put up with all this through the years?
Well, you know, when I started racing, before we were married. And I remember when I was dating her, I would go pick her up with a race car hooked behind the trailer, and that's where we dated. We'd go racing. I'd be racing, drag racing and circle track racing. And what she likes to tell people, they ask her what does she think about it, how long she's been in it. And she said, well, you know, when I met Marvin, we started dating. He was racing then, so didn't ever see him. But she said one of the funny things, first race, she said, I didn't know nothing about racing. She said, I remember seeing them guys crawl in the window of that race car, and I asked Mom, I said, why don't we just open the doors and get in? I was racing when I met her, and of course I'm still racing, and then when we got married back in 1974, we've been married 39 years, and she broke her back the first year we were married, so we didn't have any kids until going in the 80s, but I had worked hard. I grew up with nothing, and I made a little bit of money, and I started spending on racing. And of course, she used to fuss at me about it a little bit. She would have really fussed if she knew how much I was really spending. I wasn't always truthful with her about it. But she says, okay, you spend all you want to on racing. Just don't fuss at me when I come in here with new clothes or whatever I buy. If you're going to race and spend all that money, just don't fuss at me. So over the years, I've tried to never fuss at her for what she spends, because I know she knows that I spend a whole lot more than what she does.
You know what she's had to put up with then.
You know, racing is something that people that do it, it sort of draws you together. I can't really explain it, but from racing, one race to another, we get out there at the racetrack and we'll fuss and fight and carry on, but when it's all said and done, racing is some of the most loyal people they are. They make friends and they maintain friendships over the years. And probably when you get down to it, that's probably my most treasured asset that I've got in racing is the friends I've made over the years. And of course, families hold together in racing. I see time after time after time where, you know, the whole family's involved, and particularly nowadays when the young kids can start out racing. Uh, you know, we have a lot of them that come to Cornell to race, and they got their kids, and they got their wives, and their husband, and their grandmamas, and you know, they run around taking pictures and just having a big time. And no question in my mind, it's real good for the kids because when they down there racing, they're with their families in a wholesome atmosphere versus being out on the street back home, Lord knows who. So family plays a big part in racing, from the dirt tracks all the way up to the top levels in NASCAR.
We realize that you're facing a lot of adversity right now with your health. You're relying on that family and probably your faith as far as dealing with this, aren't you?
You know, I am, and it's real touching with, and a lot of them are racers, the people that knows my health situation and the cards I've got, the emails, and I got a website, CaringBridge.org, that I post to every day or so and keep them up with my progress. And I just put that thing up, I think it was Sunday, which it's been up 7 days, and I was looking at it this morning, and I know I had 870 something people on that site, you know, looking to see what my progress or lack thereof was. So, but yeah, I got some real health issues now, but the people that I know and that's contacting me and all, it just makes it a whole lot more easy to deal with, knowing that I got friends out there that cure and concerned. I'm not down and out yet. I plan on being around a good while, and I might be a little slower and not as fast as I used to be, but I plan on being around.
All right, we count on you fighting it.
All right, good.